My daughter secretly got married without telling me about her wedding, so I secretly cancelled the whole thing that I paid for. When I found out that my daughter, Lily, had gotten married without telling me, I felt a sharp pang of betrayal. It wasn't just the secrecy, but the fact that I had been left out of one of the most important moments of her life. I had always dreamed of walking her down the aisle, seeing her in her wedding dress, and celebrating with all our friends and family. But she chose to elope, and that hurt more than I could admit. I thought I had raised her better. We had always been so close, sharing everything, even the smallest of details. How could she do this to me? It wasn't just about the wedding, though. It was the idea that she had kept this huge life decision a secret, like I didn't matter enough to be involved. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. I had spent years saving for her dream wedding. The venue was booked, the caterers lined up, the florists consulted. I had put my heart into making sure her special day would be nothing short of perfect. But now, it seemed like all that effort had been for nothing. She had run off to the courthouse without a word to me, without even letting me know she was serious enough to take that step. I knew I couldn't just let it go. This wasn't just about a wedding, it was about respect, about trust. So, I took matters into my own hands. I contacted the venue and the vendors, explaining the situation. It felt like a betrayal on my part, but I couldn't help myself. I was too hurt. The wedding was supposed to be in 2 weeks. It was a huge affair that I had meticulously planned, but when I told the vendors to cancel everything, they were confused but complied, knowing that the wedding wasn't going forward. As much as I regretted doing it, it was the only way I could make her understand the gravity of her actions. Lily called me, frantic when she found out. "What did you do?" she screamed. "I can't believe you cancelled everything." I had no choice, I told her, my voice cold. "You didn't give me a chance to be part of your wedding. You didn't even let me know until it was too late." I was hurt, Lily. "You hurt me." She tried to apologize, but the damage was already done. I needed her to understand how important it was for me to be a part of that day. I had sacrificed so much for her, but it seemed like none of it mattered to her. It felt like she had made her own choices without considering how it would affect the people who loved her. In the end, she didn't get the big wedding she had always dreamed of, and I didn't get the moment I had envisioned. We both lost, in a way. It took months for things to settle, for the tension between us to ease. I still loved her, but the bond had been broken, and it would take time to rebuild. I wasn't sure if things would ever be the same, but one thing was clear, our relationship would never be the same as it once was. Months passed, and the weight of the silence between us was unbearable. There were no family dinners, no shared moments of laughter, no simple conversations that felt natural. I watched as Lily moved forward with her life, adjusting to her new role as a wife, while I stood on the sidelines, feeling like a stranger in her world. It was a slow unraveling of everything we once had, and despite my best efforts, I couldn't seem to find a way to bridge the gap. She called me once, a few weeks after the wedding incident. Her voice was tentative, as though unsure of how to approach me after everything that had happened. "Dad," she began softly, "I know I messed up. I should have told you. I should have had you there with me. I was wrong." Her words stung, but they also gave me a glimmer of hope. Maybe there was still a chance for us. I had never wanted to hurt her, and I realized that my reaction, though it felt justified at the time, had only made things worse. It wasn't just about the wedding, it was about the trust that had been broken between us. "I've been thinking about everything too," I replied, my voice steady, but the pain still evident. "I was hurt, Lily. And I did what I thought was right at the time, but I realize now. I shouldn't have taken things into my own hands. I should have tried to understand why you did what you did, instead of just reacting." We talked for hours that day, and though we didn't resolve everything, it felt like a start. Slowly, we began to rebuild what we had lost, one conversation at a time. There were still awkward moments, silences that lingered longer than they should, but we kept trying. We both knew it wouldn't be easy, that the scar would always be there, but we were willing to fight for our relationship. Over time, Lily made more of an effort to include me in her life. She invited me over for dinner with her husband, and we started to have long, honest talks about where we had gone wrong. Her apology had been the first step toward healing, but I knew that it would take time. I had to show her that I trusted her again, and she had to show me that she valued our bond. It was a long journey, one filled with missteps and frustrations. But eventually, we found our way back to each other. It wasn't the same as it once was, but it was real, and it was something we could work with. The love was still there, buried beneath the hurt and disappointment, and that was enough to start over. We both knew the road ahead wouldn't be perfect, but we had learned a valuable lesson. The heart may break, but with time, understanding, and effort, it can heal. As time passed, we both worked on understanding each other more deeply. The lessons we had learned from our struggles were hard-earned, but they shaped us into more patient, empathetic people. I came to realize that Lily's decision to elope, though hurtful at the time, was a reflection of her own desire for independence, not a rejection of me. She had wanted to do things her way, without the weight of expectations or obligations. It was a lesson in letting go, in accepting that she was no longer a little girl, but a woman capable of making her own choices. And for Lily, she learned the importance of communication, of letting the people who love you in on your biggest moments. She realized that family, even with all its imperfections, should be included in the milestones of your life, not out of obligation, but out of love. She had tried to protect me from what she thought would be a difficult situation, but in the end, it only made things harder. Our relationship wasn't the same as it once was, but perhaps that wasn't such a bad thing. We had changed, grown in different ways, and perhaps that was the only way we could move forward. The days of the picture-perfect family and the dream wedding were gone, but the real work of rebuilding our connection had begun. It wasn't always easy. We had disagreements, sometimes even arguments, but they were different now. We listened more, gave each other space to speak, and tried to see things from the other's perspective. Slowly, we started to find our rhythm again, new, but still rooted in the love we had for each other. Eventually, Lily and I had our first real conversation about her wedding day, one where we laughed about how absurd everything had been, but also acknowledged the hurt and the healing. We joked that next time, if she ever decided to have a party for anything, we'd make sure it was a family affair from the start. It was our way of saying, we're not perfect, but we're in this together. And while that day didn't go the way I had planned, it turned out that what we really needed was time to grow, to understand, and to forgive. We didn't get the big celebration, but we got something far more important, the chance to start over, with more love, more understanding, and a deeper bond than we had before. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments where I felt the sting of the past. But as we moved forward, I realized that the heart may break, but with time, understanding, and effort, it can heal, and sometimes, it heals even stronger than before. In the months that followed, I began to see subtle changes in our relationship. It wasn't a dramatic transformation, but small moments that told me we were heading in the right direction. There were no grand gestures, no magical resolutions, but the air between us had cleared, and the heaviness of unspoken hurt had lifted. We started to reconnect in the ways that mattered most. Lily and I spent afternoons together, doing things we used to enjoy, coffee dates, trips to the park, and even the occasional impromptu shopping trip, just like old times. It was a slow rebuild, but each step we took felt like a victory. One day, Lily invited me over to their new home for dinner. It wasn't anything fancy, just a quiet evening with her and her husband, a small gesture that meant more than she knew. As we sat around the table, laughing about the ridiculousness of the wedding situation, it hit me, the love we had was still there. It wasn't the same, but it was deeper now, more genuine, more grounded in the reality of who we were and what we had been through. For the first time in months, I realized that I wasn't angry anymore. The bitterness had faded, and in its place was a sense of peace, of acceptance. I wasn't trying to reclaim the past, I was learning to embrace the present. What had once been broken could never go back to exactly how it was, but that didn't mean it was beyond repair. In fact, what we had now was something new, a bond that had been tested and weathered, yet remained unbroken at its core. Lily and I were no longer living in the shadow of what had happened, but instead, we were growing into something even stronger than before. She had learned how to communicate, how to trust me with her choices. And I had learned how to let go, how to accept that she was her own person, not someone who could be controlled by my expectations or dreams. I also came to appreciate the fact that her marriage, though unconventional in the way it had happened, was something she had chosen for herself. It wasn't the wedding I had imagined, but it was the life she had built, and I was proud of her for it. She had found her own path, and though it was different from what I would have chosen, I saw her happiness, and that was what mattered most. We still had our moments of disagreement, of course, no relationship is perfect. But I no longer held on to the past with such a tight grip. I had learned to forgive, not just her, but myself, for holding on to my own expectations of what should have been. And that, in itself, was liberating. As I watched Lily move forward in her life, I realized that I didn't need her to need me in the same way she once had. I needed her to be happy, to be fulfilled, and to know that no matter what, I would always be there for her. Our bond had changed, but it had evolved into something more resilient, more real. The heart may break, but with time, understanding, and effort, it can heal, and sometimes, it heals even stronger than before. And in that healing, I found a new depth to our relationship, one that I never could have imagined in the beginning, but was more meaningful than anything I had ever expected. As I reflected on everything that had transpired, the hurt, the betrayal, the healing, I realized that the journey had brought us to a place of profound understanding. The depth of our relationship now was something I couldn't have anticipated. It wasn't based on idealized moments or perfect events. Instead, it was built on raw honesty, forgiveness, and a newfound respect for each other's individuality. Our relationship was no longer about me protecting her from the world or trying to shape her future according to my vision. It was about her walking beside me as her own person, with her own choices, mistakes, and triumphs. And it was about me learning to be there for her in a way that was truly supportive, without imposing my expectations. In the months that followed, we had more conversations than I could count, some lighthearted, others more serious. But what stood out was the way we could talk freely now. There was no longer the wall of unspoken resentment, no longer the tension in the air when we were together. We didn't always agree, but we respected each other's perspective. We listened more than we spoke, and that made all the difference. I also began to notice how much more present I was for her now, without the cloud of my own disappointment hanging over us. I was no longer living in the past, trying to right wrongs that couldn't be undone. Instead, I was living in the moment, with an open heart, ready to accept her as she was, not as I had hoped her to be. And Lily, in turn, began to show me a side of herself I hadn't seen before. She became more open with me, more willing to share her life, her struggles, and her joys. She understood, too, that family was about mutual respect and trust, and that by including me in her world, we could both grow stronger together. It was in these moments that I realized how much richer our bond had become. Our relationship was no longer defined by the perfect image I had once held of it, but by the genuine love that had survived the test of time and hardship. We had learned, through pain and effort, that the real strength of family lies in its ability to weather storms, to forgive, and to rebuild. The relationship I had with Lily wasn't about what we had lost, but about what we had gained, an unspoken understanding that we were both human, both flawed, and both worthy of love. In that healing, I found peace. In that peace, I found the freedom to embrace the future, whatever it held, with open arms. And I knew, no matter what came next, that our bond, though different, would be something more meaningful than anything I had ever expected. It had grown, not in spite of the pain, but because of it. And for that, I was truly grateful.